a pepper, he's a pepper, she's a pepper, we're a pepper. Wouldn't you like to be a pepper too?
Hello and welcome to the Dr. Pepper Museum and Free Enterprise Institute's virtual professional development for teachers in the month of January. This is an on-demand virtual professional development, so you just watch it whenever is convenient for you. When we're done, you can complete the survey to receive professional development credit. So if you would like that certificate of completion, just complete the survey afterwards. If you haven't seen our previous videos, go to our website under educators and check out all those different videos. You can also follow our newsletter to receive this and more every month. Our goal through these is to teach you ways to incorporate economics, which is our mission here, into your classroom. Our goal is to make sure that things are as smooth and easy for you. We know you have a difficult job and we certainly don't want to make it any harder. Instead, we want to give you the practical tools you need to incorporate economics into your class as painlessly as possible. Today's professional development is all about economics and literature. Now, we've talked about this before, about incorporating economics into all subjects, especially something like media literacy. But today we're going to dive into 3 texts that we think can be awesome examples of economics in the classroom, and 3 ways that you can incorporate these lessons that you're probably reading in your classroom. At least 2 of them you have definitely read in your classroom, and all of these are applicable to all grade levels, but just need to be accommodated. We do this for a very important reason. Our following teachers are of all grade levels and in all different areas, so we try not to limit it to one grade level. Our goal is to do the research for you and then present it to you in a quick and easy way. And so if you like what you see here, but you want to learn a little bit more, go to other professional development sources that we mentioned in this presentation, because this is not the know-all be-all. It is a starting point for you. I just do as much research as I can and then present it to you all together. So let's go ahead and get started with economics in literature. So economics in literature, why would I do this? For one thing, many times social studies, at least in the lower grades, doesn't get enough time allotted in the day. Unfortunately, a lot of districts have to preface things that are going to be tested or things that our students are struggling with, and really need to focus on English and math and maybe science. And so history and social studies, economics falls to the back burner, which is unfortunate because it's a subject that's going to impact your students every day for the rest of their lives. And we want to make sure that we learn from history and we learn from economics so that our students are ready to be productive citizens. And so we need to make sure our students are financially literate and understand the economic system that they'll be going into. And a lot of times that can be difficult to carve out that time of the day. So instead, we suggest that we work together as teachers, or maybe you're a teacher who as a whole teaches every subject in a self-contained classroom, which is something that I did, in which case you can simply teach cross-curricularly. If you're an English teacher in an upper grade, you can use this to give your social studies and history and economics teachers a hand. Because while we divide up our subjects, when we don't teach cross-curricularly, it implies to students that things can be put in boxes, that math only applies to math class, that English only applies to English class. And when they leave school, they're going to realize that that's not the case. In real life, all of these different subjects intermix, and they're important because they work together. And so we want our students to evaluate economics principles or other subjects within the other topics. And so English is one of my favorite ways to do this. Within an English class, yes, we're learning about grammar, vocabulary, we're learning about different story structures, but we're also learning about ourselves and people and morals and ethics and evaluating what we do as people. And so this is a great opportunity to throw economics in the mix, as it is a huge part of what makes us human. And a lot of the books that you're reading are already doing that. And so today we're going to talk about 3 different pieces that you can talk about in your classroom and incorporate economics. There are certainly more than this, so please don't stop here and look at whatever books are in your class and use what you're doing. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You do not need to add a new book. Just use what you have and take an economic spin on it. And so today we'll be talking about The Giver by Lois Lowry, The Lorax by Dr. Seuss, and I Pencil from Leonard E. Read. All three are incredibly common at all grade levels, and so I hope this is something you're familiar with. Certainly the first two, and then the last one, I think you'll probably find it in your textbook if you are 5th grade and up, as it is a really common piece of writing. And so as we talk about these, please know, I am by no means an expert in any of these books, or in iPencil's case, stories, but I have taught all three of these in a classroom, so I know how students respond to it. And personally, they're things that I have really connected with, and so I hope this is something that your students can benefit from. All right, so first we're going to talk about The Giver by Lois Lowry. This is my favorite book, and it's something that really impacted me. I mean, this book is my original from when I was in elementary. I read it in 5th grade. I know now a lot of kids are reading it in 6th grade. I taught it in an 8th grade class. My students were just a little behind. And this is an amazing book. As I'm sure everyone probably knows, this is a book that really shapes students. It's sometimes the first time they've really critically thought, and so it can really make or break a student and really start them on this journey of reading and exploring things critically. And so in this Newbery Medal award-winning classic, 12-year-old Jonas lives in a seemingly ideal world. Not until he is given his life assignment as a receiver does he begin to understand the dark secrets behind his fragile community. Now, this book is all about a community going for sameness. As I'm sure everyone's read this, the community looking for sameness. The economy is angled at sameness. Everyone receives the same end result. Everyone plays an important role in their community that they are assigned, and even though those roles are different, the result is the same, and that they are all important in this large ecosystem that is their community of sameness. And in this story, we explore a community that is much different than what we live in today and what your students live in. I read this in Texas as a 5th grader and found this world interesting, but very different from my own. I was living, as many of you are, in a free enterprise system. I saw competition every day. I had been told from a very young age that what I did, my job, would impact the results. If I had a high money making, prestigious job, then my lifestyle would end up very different than if I had a lower money making, and vice versa. And so what we did reflected on what happened to us. How much we worked impacted the more we got, or the result. This give and take, uneven, this lack of sameness. That's what I came from. And so this world seemed very strange to me. It was intriguing. I really enjoyed talking about it. It was a great experience for me as a student. I then taught this book when I was an 8th grade teacher in American Samoa. It's a U.S. territory in the South Pacific. I lived on a beautiful island called Aunuu, literally paradise. And there were only about 200 people on that island on any given day, and it was a boat ride to get to that island. I had a self-contained 8th grade class, and my students' abilities ranged from having never been to school before to about a high school junior. And so I had a very broad range of students. But one thing that really impacted this book was my students' community. What they were coming from was so much different than my own. And so when they read this book, they interpreted it completely different. And I was fascinated by the conversations I was having with my students. You see, in Samoa, it is a U.S. territory, so officially it's a free enterprise system. It has 3 branches of government like us, and in the same way, it also has an economy that reflects ours. Officially. But in reality, it was very different. In the tribal culture that they have in this beautiful Polynesian community, they believe in togetherness. They believe in sameness. They value things like matching clothes and making sure that you don't stand out because together we are better. They believe in everyone coming together as a community and as a family is more important than the individual's success. And so many times only one person in the family would work, but everybody would benefit from their money, vice versa. If everybody worked, everyone pooled everything together. In the same way, their government was very together. So even though they are officially a three-branch system like the United States, they were really run by a tribal system that was very community and group centered. It was very much the elders training the high chieftains, training lower chieftains and things like that. And so they were able to retain a lot of their culture. So my students grew up in a very different world than I did. And when they read this book, they thought that Jonas's world, this world of sameness, made complete sense. It wasn't weird to them, because in their community, that's what was normal. In fact, we had a activity book that I would pull lesson plans from and worksheets and things that was definitely intended for Western children like me. And when I gave them the activities, the prompts were very biased or would lean towards trying to push kids to an answer about how strange this world was. And every time my students would say, no, like, they've got it right. They've got it right. Like they're the same, like they're together. They succeed as a group. It's okay that everyone's even. And their economy was very similar. So let's talk about their economy, which I know this is an economics lesson, but remember, economics impacts life. So if we're thinking about the free enterprise system, where competition breeds creativity and better product and innovation, versus a society or an economic system that does not have that result. That was the case in Samoa. Our Samoan friends, for the most part, did not compete. In fact, if I was selling my taro next to you, I wouldn't want my basket. Taro is a delicious root that they have and a product that my island made. I would sell my taro at the same rate as yours because I didn't want to compete. I didn't want to take away your business because I didn't want to hurt you. And so everyone sold about the same. Now, this wasn't everywhere, but I continuously saw this. If I was making dresses, I would check with my neighbor who was also making dresses and make sure they were the same price or that I didn't offer something strange. They have a bus system where the family buses provide transportation across the islands, and they've all worked together to ensure that each one costs the exact same. None are more expensive than the others or better than the others. And this is incredibly important to their culture. They didn't want to hurt each other with competition. Well, competition is such an important part of the free enterprise system. And immigrants who came into Samoa do offer that competition. And because of that, their businesses tend to do better. So that's one way that the economics was different. But the idea of competition, one person being better than another, is in their economics, it's in their society. And so because of it, they read this book incredibly different than I did. And I think that's incredibly interesting. And so I came back to the United States and I I substitute taught in a couple of classes while I was looking for teaching jobs and museum jobs. And I actually had the privilege of teaching this book as a long-term sub. And I was baffled by the fact that these, in this case, it was sixth graders, did read this book and saw what I saw. They responded the way I saw and what I said, versus my students on island would have said something completely different. This idea of sameness, standing out, was so foreign to these students in this American classroom as opposed to in the Samoan class. That was how they preferred. And that moral and ethical belief and the things that guide them as a society impact their economy. And that's the same way with other countries and other communities. And so when you read this book, try having a conversation with your students about how this society and the economy in it impacts the people. Do you think people will work as hard at being a doctor or being a planter if at the end of the day they're going to get the same amount of money or the same amount of food? Everyone gets what they need, but no one necessarily gets what they deserve. What do your students prefer? Do they prefer need or deserve? And I think you'll find that the conversation is really interesting. And I think it's important when you have these discussions with students, definitely when I was having it with my students, be mindful that there is not a right answer. And many times our Western bias will come into play here, but it's very important when having these conversations with your students. We're not trying to say that one economy is better than the other. In this particular instance, that's not what we're doing. We're asking kids to evaluate our current economy. What's a downfall? You know, how hard is it to be an entrepreneur when you could work really hard and nobody wants to purchase your product and you don't succeed and you might not eat that week? There are countries that people work incredibly hard, but just because of where they're at in society, they will never work that hard enough to make that money. And so depending on your grade level, you can show students how communities with sameness have succeeded, because there are examples of that, and show them how communities with sameness have failed, how it's difficult for a country to figure out what each individual needs. And so they can try, but not everyone is the same, and everyone has different needs, and it is very difficult for a community to meet those needs of each individual, as opposed to a community like we're in today, where you pick out those things and you get the money that you've earned in your job that might be different than somebody else, and then you use what you've earned to find what you need. You can talk about how there are many communities who are in the middle and how there isn't a community that is all sameness or all free enterprise, because we are all just working towards making sure that our citizens in our community and that we as individuals are okay. And everyone's a little different. So if you're reading The Giver with your students, try taking an economics approach. Talk about communities in the real world that have these economies. Try asking your students about the benefits and negatives of the community that they're in. Ask them what's strange about this. And then look and see what other communities are saying about this, because it is incredibly interesting. And make sure that your students know that it is okay and that there is not a wrong answer in this particular instance, because many of your students might come from communities that are more family oriented, that are more community success over the individual. And it's important that they're not silenced in this conversation, because they will provide such a valid insight for your other students to see. And so we want to make sure that every student's opinion is appreciated and heard in this particular instance. So definitely when you're reading this with your students, or just reading as an individual, look and see what economics connections you can make. Most elementary schools are obsessed, or at least mildly obsessed, with Dr. Seuss. There aren't many that I walk into and don't see some kind of Dr. Seuss in that main office, or in the break room, or definitely in the classroom, or at least a Cat in the Hat on a bookshelf in the library. Dr. Seuss is wonderful because he uses all these different strategies to teach basic phonemes and sentence structures and things like that, so that little bitties can really see those sight words and read them. But he also delves into things that are really, really deep topics, very high level ideas that any student can benefit from. So if you are an elementary teacher, I know this book is in your library, or at least somewhere close by. And if you're a high school or middle school teacher, I really encourage you to start looking at that children's literature to use in your classroom, because you would be surprised how much fun your students will have and how engaged they will be, because they will not be under the daunting idea of this like heavy primary source or something. Instead, you can start off your lesson with the Dr. Seuss book and then connect to real life events, and usually it shocks them to see, oh, okay, because they understood that Dr. Seuss book, which I hope any student can. They can then really understand the historic events that it's built off after. Now, there are many Dr. Seuss books that connect to deeper issues or events in history, but today we'll be talking about the Lorax. And there is a movie for the Lorax, so many of your students are probably very familiar with it. If not, the book is very easy to get. But the Lorax is a wonderful story about the environment and how businesses impact the environment and how shoppers' choices impact the environment. Here at the museum, there are a lot of things that we hope our guests take away, but one thing that we really want to make sure that our guests and students learn is that their shopping choices make a difference. that you can make a difference with the way that you shop. If there's something you care about, shop in a way that will influence that. Shopping is essentially voting for what you believe in. And so you are voting whether or not you are doing consciously or not. So we encourage our guests to think about what you're buying and how that impacts the society that you're in or the environment. And so this is a great example of that because it is all about a business. So Dr. Seuss's beloved story teaches kids to treat the planet with kindness and stand up and speak up for others. Experience the beauty of truffula trees, and the danger of taking our earth for granted in a story that is timely, playful, and hopeful. Now, you'll notice they didn't say economics in there. They didn't say, hey, you will also learn about economics and how your choices will impact the world. But it is a big theme in this, and it's not something you have to do directly. If you have older kids, you may want to ask them about this directly and have them reflect on it. If you have littles, you may just want to ask a few questions. But try directing your students, after you read this story, to the economic results. In this story, you have this valuable limited resource, right? We have the truffula trees, and they look like little pom-poms on top of a palm tree, and they're really beautiful and they're everywhere, and they make the best things. They make thneeds. Thneeds? Yes. Okay, it's THNEEDS, thneeds. And it's something that you need. And this thneed, which everyone needs, or at least wants and is persuaded into purchasing them because they need it, is made out of this limited resource, these trees. And if you take a few, that's okay, they'll grow back. But if you take too many too fast, you run out of this limited resource, which is what happens in this story. And so this individual, the Onceler, makes this thneed and is so excited he starts to grow his business using advertising techniques and innovation. He's able to grow it, and you can even look at his business and be impressed. It is an impressive business. This entrepreneur is taking this resource that no one ever really used and turning it into something wonderful that people can buy, purchase, enjoy, and that they feel they need or need. And so this book shows an entrepreneur doing a business and having shoppers shopping for this thing that they think they need. And you can really hone in on this. You can talk about the advertising, you can talk about the growth of the business, how creative this entrepreneur was, and then you can see the result. Because as people buy these resources or these products, and as these resources are being used, they're not very smart with them, and they run out. Whose fault is it? Whose fault is it that it ran out? This is a question that we as a community ask all the time. Whose fault is it that this happened? The pollution that's going in our oceans because of large businesses dumping pollution into the ocean, or pollution in the air from different chemicals being burned, whose fault is it? And that's a question that we really don't know the answer. Everyone points their finger at everyone, and to be honest, it's probably a little bit of everything. You see, is it the Onceler's fault because he created this product? Is it the government in that area's fault for not making him stop? Or is it the shopper's fault because they bought it? They're the reason that he keeps making it. Now, you can have this conversation with your students and really delve in as much as you want. Understand that with older kids especially, this is opening up a can of worms, but sometimes can of worms are the best conversations we can possibly have in our class. Just make sure that your students know that this isn't a point to fight about, that fighting doesn't really get us anywhere. How can we debate as a class respectfully? How can we write up our ideas? And maybe the best thing, how can we find a solution? Because we can argue with each other or point the finger at another party. We can say, oh no, it's the Onceler's fault. Oh no, it's the government's fault. Oh no, it's the tree's fault because they didn't grow enough. It's the shopper's fault. We can just point our fingers everywhere, but maybe instead we need to make up a plan. And so with your students, don't be afraid to have that conversation, because it's a conversation that they're going to have as adults. And if they don't have it in a safe environment with somebody that they trust and can model this for them when they're young, they're going to be shouting at each other when they're older, and they might not get anywhere. But if we can raise students who know how to problem solve, we stand a chance of being something great next time. And so with this book, yes, it's a children's book, but this is a big idea. And so read the book. I would point out how wonderful the Onceler is. Point out his ingenuity, his innovation. Point out that he is an entrepreneur. Point out how this business is meeting a need or a need, how the advertising is persuading people to come in and buy, and then talk about the result and say, whose fault is it? And then tell them and talk to your students about ways that you as the shopper or you as a citizen in this community can make a difference. Now, you might be like the main character of this book who plants seeds and is able to replant this environment, which is definitely one way that we can help. We can clean up trash as individuals. We can plant trees as individuals. We can take care of our yard and our land and take care of the things that we do. So one, we can do something about it personally. We can also, as the shoppers, look at what we're shopping for. Maybe if we are aware as shoppers, if I'm smart and I start researching about, oh, well, I really wanted a thneed. I wonder what makes a thneed. And then I realize that it's made of the, a very, very rare truffula tree, and there are so few left on earth. Maybe I shouldn't buy that product. Or maybe if you're a business owner, you can make smart decisions with your business and choose not to use this limited resource that is slowly going away. And so all of these are just ways for you to have a conversation with your students. What can we as individuals do about problems like this? So yes, it's an environmentality book. It is about the environment, but economics is a part of absolutely everything, and this is no different. So if you are reading the Lorax this year, no matter your student's age, I encourage you to have an economics conversation with them. It's good and it's bad, and have that topic. And once again, make sure your students know there isn't a right answer. There isn't a wrong answer. If you watch the movie, there's a lot of different advertising and big business ideas that are in there. You're welcome to have those conversations with them in there as well. The book is a little bit more direct and doesn't like give the answers away or give your students a response. And so you might want to start this conversation with the book and then reward them later with the movie and do some comparisons. But it is something that we can really engage our students with. So the Lorax. I Pencil by Leonard E. Read was published in 1948 and has had hundreds of thousands of Americans of all ages who continue to read, and the simple and beautiful explanation of the miracle of the invisible hand by following the production of an ordinary pencil. Now, the writing itself, if you read it in book form or in a poem, because there are quite a few different variations over the years, this is a telling of a pencil's genealogy, essentially, a pencil sharing about its life. It is a much more mature writing style, so if you have little bitties, there are kid versions, and so please don't feel limited to the older kid or the big kid version. This is intended for adults and older students just because of the writing style, but there are kid versions. For example, at the museum, we use the Tuttle Twins quite a bit. This is a book series written to teach students about economics principles in the free enterprise system, and it's just a picture book that explains this concept. And so these siblings explore this concept. So please don't feel like this is above your grade level if you are an elementary teacher. If you're an older teacher, or sorry, if you are a teacher of older students, this is an excellent resource for you. I taught it with my 8th grade students. My students were all are second English learners. English was their second language. And so many of them were not accustomed to the language in that poem. or in the writing. And so I chose to give them both versions and let them read it, whichever one they felt most comfortable with. And I found that my higher level students loved the artistic way that this pencil was personified versus, but my other students were still able to understand and weren't embarrassed that they couldn't read it because I gave every student each one side by side. So yes, this is a little higher level, but it is accessible and there are plenty of versions. So you can get something like this to teach the same idea but in a different way, or you can look on a lot of these different economics websites and find a version of it for your students. We also have a video that we'll link on here all about this story, but just summarized. But essentially, this is a pencil talking about its life. And this pencil shares how it began and its family background. If you have younger students, you might want to talk about what genealogy is, your family tree, and how many people had to happen before you could be there. And in the same way, a product like a pencil, simple though it may be, has a big family tree. And talk about how many people, how many places, how many innovations had to happen to make that pencil in your hand possible. Because a pencil seems so simple to us, but it's something that is incredible and comes from an incredible process. And so the story takes you through each step. It's not just wood, it's a specific wood from a specific forest. And here are the 8 people who cut down that tree and the 3 that saw it in place and the person who had to invent that saw and the person who had to change the saw so that it's just the right size so that it gets your wood, and the graphite and how the graphite was found, and then how it was mined and how it was processed, where that was and who made it. Maybe we talk about the eraser, the chemical compounds that have to be in place to make that eraser, the people, the scientists who made that possible, the people who worked in the factories to put that together. What about the people who put that pencil together? Or the people who designed the box? The person who designed the advertising so that your teacher bought you that pack of pencils instead of the other. These are all ideas that we never think about because a pencil's just a pencil. Or is it an example of this invisible hand? In the Tuttle Twins book, which again is about 2 siblings who are exploring the world around them. It's built like a chapter book with different pictures and things like that. And it's pretty short. And they do have different lesson plans and things available on the website for this company. But in this book, they go to a pencil factory. And you can actually find videos of pencil factories online. And they are pretty fun for kiddos to watch. And this worker at the factory, the foreman, says, "Do you think the pencil you're holding is easy or hard to make?" And every student will say, "Oh, it must be easy." And he says, "Well, I'm going to make a bold claim. That pencil in your hand is actually extremely difficult to make. And surprisingly enough, not a single person on the face of the earth knows how to make one." This will surprise your students, and it's something you can ask them. Just say, "Okay, how easy is making a pencil?" And they'll think about it. They might even list out the different steps and then ask them or make this claim. Say, "I bet not one person could do this on their own." And of course, you have a student who's crafty or smart alecky, and they say, no, I could do this on my own. And they're like, "Oh, okay, why don't you tell me how?" And then they start to explain, like, "Oh, okay, well, where do you get the wood?" "Oh, the store." "No, well, you can't. If you go to the store, then You have the worker at the store, you have the person who cut the wood to put it in the store, you have the store's advertising, you have the store's managers. I mean, there's at least 200 people just in that store, and you haven't even gotten started to the lumberyard where it came from, or the forest, or the person who grew that tree. And so go back, okay. And then they talk about this long story of how they created this pencil on their own. The goal is to show students that invisible hand, that system that's working in our economy that helps any one product put together, because no one person could do these things alone. And at one time in history, and you can talk about with students, people did have to do things alone. And so products like pencils would never be made. And so we want to show our kids how we have improved by working together. That's, of course, a concept that we really want our students to take away from lessons, right? Work as a community, together, in a group, collaboration. Like, those are all things that you're already telling your students. This is a great activity to really hone in on just how important we are to each other, and how our communities around the world are working together to make a product as simple as a pencil because without each other, we couldn't do it. And it's something we don't see happening. We might think of a factory, but we don't think about the many people who had to bring the materials to the factory, or the people who thought up that product to begin with. And so please show your students just how many people are involved in the basic things that they see today. Now, you can start with a pencil, of course, but then you might want to try something else. Let's say we start with a Dr. Pepper. We show our students a Dr. Pepper and we say, okay, how easy do you think it is to make a bottle of Dr. Pepper? And if you're lucky, your students might go ahead and say something really obvious, like, so easy. I could do that in my kitchen. You're like, okay, good. I'm glad. They might have said, I went to the Dr. Pepper Museum and I learned how to make a soda at home. I could do that. Great. That's cool. What do you need? And start writing that family tree on the board. We start with a Dr. Pepper. Okay. What's in a Dr. Pepper bottle? Okay, I have the glass bottle. I have the cap. I have the Dr. Pepper. I see advertisements. I have advertisements. Okay. And then you need to branch off of that. Okay, who do you think made that advertisement? Okay, maybe an artist. Okay, maybe a writer. Okay, what about the cap? Who made the cap? That's metal. Oh, okay, so somebody had to shape that metal. Oh, somebody also had to paint that metal. Oh, somebody had to get the metal melted so that it could be shaped. Somebody had to go get the metal out of the ground. I bet that was many somebodies. What about the Dr. Pepper? Dr. Pepper is carbonated water and syrup. Somebody's got to get that water, clean that water, and put the carbonation in it. That syrup is made out of sugar and flavoring. Some scientists had to make that flavoring. I mean, you could go on. And the idea is to never stop, because there are so many people working together around the clock, around the world, to make a simple product like Dr. Pepper. And that's what we want our students to come away with. We want them to understand that something as simple as a pencil or a Dr. Pepper takes a lot of people working together. And so iPencil, though it's not a piece of writing that you have in your classroom right away, or wasn't probably in your curriculum, is a really great lesson. It's one that can easily be slid in if it's after testing or if it's a warm-up. So please don't think this takes too much of your time. It can be English, or it could be social studies or economics, but this is something that's a really easy way to teach students about a much bigger world around them. And so I would encourage you to take this and run with it in your classroom. Show your students a little bit more about it. We have on there our email, and in our website we will have different resources for this. Again, this is one that, yes, is probably not in your curriculum, but it might be in your textbook. Or It's free online. Just look it up. A lot of economics stories and economics resources are free because it's very well funded. And so I have some lesson plans that we'll put in the email that go along with this story. And so this is a way for your students to kind of separate the pencil and identify what's in it. We also have ways for them to analyze it and see how many people are involved in this process. So check these out, Google iPencil, and you will be amazed at just how many free resources there are for you and how many versions of this story there are. So go ahead and check out iPencil for your classroom as a little or a big activity. Now, we've talked about 3 things. There are so many books out there and ways to teach economics through literature, so please don't stop here. We have 3 other suggestions for you. So check out the museum suggested reading list. We're going to have on this email a suggested reading list. We come up with one every summer that includes a lot of economics books. These are books that directly correlate to economics. So if you are looking for things to add to your classroom library or things that will directly relate to economics, or if you want to suggest these to your parents for at-home reading during this strange learning time, see if series like the Tuttle Twins are right for your class. There are tons of these books and they have a lot of learning resources and lesson plans to go along with each. They are not free, but they are pretty affordable and teachers can get discounts depending on where you're looking for them. So the Tuttle Twins by Connor Boyack, they might be right for your class, or at least for your student, or even your child's reading level if you wanted to connect that to your parents. And then lastly, connect economics ideas to your assigned reading. Most of the books that we are assigned to read to our students in our classrooms are connected to either primary economic movements, whether it's just the student, their lifestyle, or something like The Giver, that is a totally different community, or an historic event. They are connected to history, communities, living, life in general. There is an economy in there. Don't be afraid to at least ask one question on your reading quiz about the economy of that book, the financial literacy of the student or their family, the financial choice that they made. Books are made more realistic and more meaningful by evaluations like this. And so we don't want to steer clear of economics questions. In fact, this is what's really going to make or break your student success, is if this financial concept, this financial literacy and economics, are incorporated in all the subjects. So please look out for your students in their future and start incorporating economics into English lessons. That's the end of our professional development this month. There's a little bit of time left so that you can research these books we talked about and evaluate how you're teaching economics in your classroom. When you're done, if you would like a certificate of completion for this, just go ahead and complete the survey. Thanks.